cave.
Life in the cave. Life.
Life in the cave. I was looking for a website for this, and I was like, "This is great. This is great." And I think what I'll do is I'll link it afterwards, and people can go and do the thought experiments themselves if they want to go and get the full resource because they're
Yeah.
pretty cool. But all right, it's beautiful, beautiful. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Got my coffee here in my very obnoxiously branded cup here. Um, you know, and normally I make my own coffee, but I drank all the milk last night. So here I am. But we'll get more milk today.
We're awake.
We're awake. We're here. And I'm with my good friend, John Oliver, for another dialogue. Good morning, John. How are you doing today?
Doing really well. How are you?
I'm happy to be here. We got a good show for you guys today. It's going to be a good one. It's something that if you haven't read or heard, you're going to get a really nice crash course in it today. But I encourage you to go and read the whole thing afterwards because we're going to be talking about, as you can probably tell by the title of this live stream, we'll be talking about Plato's allegory of the cave. And, John had, you actually had a really good way of putting it before we got on here. And you kind of said it, but just let's say it for the people in terms of what it's really like, the fundamental grounds for, preparing people for the world.
Well, the parable of the cave has, a lot of details in its text, but the basic idea is that if you are born in a cave and you are essentially in a prison where you can't move, you can only look at the wall in front of you, and the opening to the cave is behind you. And between the opening of the cave and what you see on the wall, because there's a fire that's illuminating the space in addition to natural light, I suppose. And between the light and yourself, you can't look at the light. You can only look at the shadows on the wall.
Yeah.
And the shadows on the wall are things being presented to you by beings who are behind you. So your entire existence is formed by someone else's narrative, plan, whatever, and you don't know anything except the shadows on the wall. And it's about enlightenment, basically.
Totally.
The parable is about enlightenment and how we might get there.
Yeah, and I think one of the best things about this as well, and that summary, you can also take it farther in that what you really put succinctly as well while we were talking earlier, is it's essential in learning how to not be fooled. If you want to not be fooled, you should read this because it's one of those things where I feel like it should be obvious that someone is probably going to try and fool you,
Right.
In your life. And that when they fool you, it's not going to be perhaps a easy thing to catch. That will be super obvious to you.
Right.
In fact, this story, this parable, highlights exactly how far the length that someone might go to alter your perception of reality.
Exactly.
And in the world we live in, with the tools available to the people who seek to manipulate your understanding of reality. And as we read this, I would like you to consider where modern vulnerabilities may lie for people, and look for similarities. And as we go through, maybe leave them in the chat. I will try and keep my eye on it. And if I see something, I probably won't be able to get to everything. I'm not a superhuman, and I still have to talk to John. But if I see something that I see like, oh, that's a great piece to pull into the conversation, I will try and grab that. But at the very least, have this conversation between yourselves as well, as we talk today. But John, I'd love to pass it over to you, and we're using a resource today from the University of Notre Dame, a published by their philosophy teaching library. And so we're going to be leaning on this resource to pull certain excerpts of the parable, and we'll read those to you today, and we'll have brief little discussions at what thoughts are provoked by the things we're reading today. And so John, I'm going to read this brief introduction they provide us.
Before you do,
Do it.
we
Yes.
have to say the obvious right out of the gate. I will just compliment you on your pronunciation of Notre Dame instead of
Oh,
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Sorry, I'm a Canadian. I like that kind of stuff. So here's the thing: the obvious elephant in the room right away in terms of being misled by imaginary invented shadows is our topic from previously, AI.
Yes,
Because
absolutely. We always
literally,
got to hit the AI.
right? So literally, before we got on today, I was on Facebook and I read one of these things that looked like it had been cut and pasted by somebody, generous soul who was cutting and pasting, because I'm on Facebook in Canada and we can't see news media. So somebody had cut and paste something and it was fake, but it was really well written, of course, but it was all fake. And it was the famous Itzhak Perlman tells all the rich people to go to hell.
Hmm.
Or Neil Young tells all the rich people to go to hell. Or apparently, this has been recirculating with pictures of various different famous musicians, telling the billionaires that, well, music is of the heart and blah, blah, blah. But it's all fake. Even though it's probably true, the guy probably would say that, but it's
Right.
clickbait. It's clickbait, right? So we've got, AI doing a lot of things like that. And we are watching them put project this on the screen, which is the wall of the cave,
Hmm.
and we are believing it because, unlike the cave, we've seen reality, but it looks so much like reality that we're getting fooled. Anyway, let's go into the cave.
All right, let's go. I'm going to read you a very brief introduction here, just for folks who, if you haven't read this, I'm not mad at you. The world is full of things, and it's probably because it was not provided to you. But you're getting it today, and it's never too late. So, just some background. Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher of immense influence, a student of Socrates, who you've probably heard of, and the teacher of Aristotle. He communicated his thoughts through philosophical dialogues designed to get their readers to engage in philosophical thinking. The questions raised in his dialogues continue to shape philosophy today. Socrates is the main character and the philosophical hero in most of Plato's dialogues. That is the case with the selection from Plato's dialogues, The Republic, that you will read below. In The Republic, which is one of Plato's longest dialogues, Socrates retells a conversation he had about the nature of justice, the human soul, the state, and the philosophical education. In the portion of the dialogue below, Socrates is describing his conversation with Glaucon, one of Plato's brothers. If Plato is one of the most most well-known philosophers, the allegory of the cave, which we'll be reading, is probably the most famous passage in any philosophical text. Um,
That's it. So I guess the most important introductory comment about the cave itself and what it conveys in general is that it's a story that's designed to encourage us to see beyond
mhm,
the popular opinions and conventional ideas and values of our time that may distort our understanding or our vision of reality. So this is a way to develop your critical thinking skills.
mhm.
It's an introduction to how you may be blinded by propaganda and false narratives and so on, but to find your way out. So yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and do the first section here. If you don't mind, John, would you read us the life in the cave portion of this story?
Yeah. Um, and now there's a little introductory text here that talks about Socrates beginning the book 7 of the Republic with this allegory called the cave, where he's telling a story to Glaucon and people who were listening in to the conversation. And the story creates a picture in words, and Socrates describes an image, and the image is this image of the cave. And the fundamental concept of it is to talk about education, essentially in a broad terms, education, how you can start to question the images that are projected onto the wall. And it's very hilarious. The text itself, I'll get to put on my actor hat. You know,
Yes.
high school acting, uh, got me along some ways. So let's read this pretentious sounding text exactly the way it's
I
said.
I do consider Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, all of these guys coming across as the most pretentious, just jerks. You can imagine, like, talking to these guys must have been infuriating. To
Well, yeah, by our standards, but if you consider that that's the way people spoke.
Yes, this is true.
Well, when this was translated into English, that's the way people spoke. Educated people would speak this way. So let me do the imitation of educated people from about 100 or more years ago.
All right.
And now, I said, compare in an image of the sort of effect education and the lack of education have on our nature. Behold, human beings living in an underground cave, which has a mouth open toward the light and reaching all across the cave. Here they have been from childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move and can only see what's in front of them, being prevented by the chains from even turning their heads. Above and behind them is a fire blazing in the distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised pathway, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the pathway, like the screen puppeteers have in front of them, above which they show their puppets. So there are puppeteers, basically, who are between
I
the
can't do any
fire and the
of the
light from the
puppets here.
cave
I would.
and the screen that people are watching. And then you get to be Glaucon and say,
I see.
then see also people passing along the wall carrying all sorts of objects that project over the wall, statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various other materials. As one would expect, some of these people are talking, others are silent.
You are describing a strange image, and they are strange prisoners.
They are like us, I replied. Do you think they see anything of themselves or one another except the shadows on the wall in front of them that are cast by the fire?
How could they, if they were never allowed to move their heads?
What about the objects being carried? In the same way, do they see only the shadows of these objects?
Yes,
And if they are able to speak with one another, don't they hold these shadows before them as what is real?
very true.
And what if the prison had an echo from the wall facing the prisoners? Do you think that whenever someone passing by spoke or made a noise, the prisoners would believe that the passing shadow uttered the sound?
No question about it. By
By,
Zeus. By Zeus!
by Zeus? Great. People such as these, I said, would believe the truth to be nothing except the shadows and manufactured objects.
Necessarily.
So let's take this moment to just think about what we've just read
Absolutely.
and think about legacy media
Yes.
and how legacy media reports everything that is said by the government. And sometimes appears to be critical, but most of the time they just want to stick to their reporting and their statistics.
Right.
And how often do they comment so that they can give a different window on that information?
I,
So
I
that's what a lot of people are complaining about in alternative media is that there's not enough critical journalism around to actually question those images that are being cast in front of us by these utterances from Trump and Hegseth and so on, all
Yeah.
these evil people who are just putting this stuff in front of us and it's being accepted without question.
I
So,
think in this allegory, one of the things I love to do is to assign roles of various players, and mainstream media is a great one. And so I like to go to the pathway in particular. And so the pathway has multiple players within it. There's the pathway, which serves as, in the wall, which serves as the obscuring, a level of obscuration, right? Because they want to ensure that only the shadows are projected, not the puppeteers themselves.
right,
So the wall serves as one in this equation, okay? And then you have the puppeteer themselves. So the person who is creating or curating the image,
right.
and then the puppet, the image being portrayed. I
Yeah,
would say
good.
that in this case, mainstream media is the puppet itself. It is not the puppeteer. It is not the wall. It is the puppet that we are being shown. And that's one of the really impressive things about this story to me is when you do what Plato wants you to do and you look at this and you ask more questions, he gives you enough to ask another question. It's the brilliance of everything that he does.
Right, exactly.
He doesn't give you the answer. He just makes you say, "Shit, I wish you asked that question too, Plato."
Right,
Um, and that's why I love this. But in that case, I think mainstream media is one of the puppets, and I think, and I'll provide another puppet. Um, your phone, your Instagram, your Facebook, your Snapchat, your
maybe even.
um, all of them, even your Substack, to a degree,
Yeah, it's
because
by
we can
somebody.
buy somebody.
Right,
And as we go on, well, there's more to read, and you'll see. But anything can be a puppet because the world we live in, that wall exists, and that is the danger. Is we can't see, but we can, but it's not easy to see what's behind the wall and to see the puppeteer themselves. And
right.
I don't know. Do you have any kind of thoughts on those ideas?
I mean, yeah, of course, and right away it goes to the concept of the puppet, and then there's the puppet itself, but then there's a person controlling the puppet, right?
Hmm.
So a number of people just even say that, sure, Trump's crazy, but he's kind of a puppet. Other people are whispering in
Yeah.
his ear or
Hmm.
not whispering in his ear, whatever the case may be. So there's this question in American politics about, well, who's actually thinking about this stuff and doing the planning and so on. And then you get uh, you know other players who are also the mouthpiece of the government, and a lot of people just think, well, are these people just like free agents? They have no consultants whatsoever. They just make shit up as they go along, and it's all their own personal preferences and ideas, and that they don't have any actual consultation with a group of actual policy people, or what's
Yeah.
going on? Where are the people who are actually thinking about stuff to put it through the puppet, as it were,
Yeah.
right? So you think of the Steve Millers, you know, and these people who are really like they're thinking hard about all this racist, Nazi fascist crap and they believe it and so on and so forth. So it's as you say, I mean, the whole setup of the wall is really interesting because it does encapsulate how the public sitting looking at the wall and the politicians and the thinkers behind the politicians are all creating a story that we're supposed to believe.
Yeah.
But if we don't question it, then we're going to be in that very restrained existence for our lives, for our entire lives.
There's a certain irony to me too that the wall itself is behind them and they could never turn back to even look at the wall themselves.
Yeah, they can't
Um,
controlling them.
so you would wonder, why would you need a wall to obscure these puppeteers? And it's because, in the sense, the person who is trying to lie, in my mind, it projects a certain form of cowardice, whereas they themselves cannot even own the deception, that they must create a deception to deceive you from their own misleading actions. This very well, to me, articulates the type of person that needs to be, that does this kind of thing. It reminds me of Peter Thiel, who is a coward and a loser, and who has done so much and is doing so much to harm our world and our reality.
Yep.
These billionaire oligarchs who use their money, stack piles of cash to
Right.
create that wall from which they can puppeteer behind. So I'm going to leave. I think that's some good thought food, for our next section here.
Let's just
Um,
quickly make
yeah,
the
please.
to the yellow brick road that leads to, you know, the the great poobah. What's his name? I forget. And then there's this big, huge, monster fire breathing thing saying, oh, and then he says, don't look behind that curtain. No, don't
Yeah.
look behind that curtain. And then the dog goes down and pulls back the curtain. And there's this little old man speaking into a microphone. And it's all revealed that it's just a big act, right?
Yeah.
The that I believe that story, whose name I've forgotten suddenly,
Wizard of
um,
Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is taken from the parable of the cave, of course.
Hmm.
That story is taken from the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is taken from the cave. So, anyway, it's just interesting to see how this filters through a lot of culture eventually. So we're going to go into the details, right?
Yeah. And so, if you don't mind, I would love to be Plato here.
Yeah.
And so this particular portion, um, which is where I think it really starts to go and get your gears turning, is what happens if a prisoner is freed. In this portion of the dialogue, Socrates, poses to Glaucon, um, what you might think would happen if someone were to escape this cave.
Right.
So I'm
Let's
going
go.
to try my best to, reach the level of acting that John reached, and
Go
I'll
for it.
do my best here. He's got some crazy lines in this one, is Glaucon. So I'm going to try and not let him outshine me in this one.
Go.
Consider then, when the healing of their ignorance and the releasing of their chains, what the healing of their ignorance and the releasing of their chains would be like, if naturally something like the following were to happen to them. Whenever someone was released and forced suddenly to stand up, turn his neck around, and walk and look up towards the light, while doing all of these things, he would feel sharp pain, and because of the brightness, he would be unable to make out the objects whose shadows he had seen before. What do you think he would say if someone told him that what he saw before was unimportant, but now, because he is a little nearer to reality and turned more to the things that are, he sees more correctly? And what if someone pointing out each thing passing by and asking him about it forced him to answer about what each thing is? Don't you think he would be confused? and believe that the things he saw before were truer than the things now being shown to him.
Yes.
And if someone forced him to look at the light itself, wouldn't his eyes hurt? And turning back to the things he was able to see clearly, wouldn't he flee and believe that those things were in reality clearer than the new things being shown to him?
That is how it would be for MAGA. Oh,
But you know,
might as
that
well.
you gotta take that, and I think it's that last portion that is very pertinent in the world we're in right now.
And also in general, this is why it's generally about education as well, because an ignorant person who starts to learn resists the learning for quite some time. It's
Hmm.
only when they get into when their eyes stop hurting from the light that they start
Right.
to comprehend that they have been misled or that they didn't know. And this is why he says at the top, it's always about education in general. So
Hmm.
it's not to make, MAGA the sort of, you know, ignorant, unseen, and there are no others. Of course, there's that kind of ignorance all over the place. And that's why it's a general parable for sure.
Yeah, and the portion in which he goes and says, if someone is pointing out each thing passing by and asking him about it, forced him to answer about what each thing is. That in particular, I think, is where you see the cognitive dissonance
Right,
in current reality, right? When I talk to someone who, and unfortunately, there's people in my family that I still can't talk to because I upset them. I
right,
upset them. It upsets them that I pose questions they cannot answer,
right.
and that they feel stupid. Okay,
Well,
and
look.
these are prideful people.
Yeah, so let's take the example of the things made of wood and other objects that they're actually using to create the shadows. And the person who could barely see because the light is in, they've never seen so much light in their lives and they're having trouble seeing it anyway. They look at it and they say, "Well, it looks like a piece of wood and a couple of pieces of wood. No, it can't be. It's got to be the dragon that I saw on the wall. No, it's got to be the dragon. It can't be just a piece of wood." And
Mhm.
that's where it becomes difficult to accept because the image on the wall, the reflection on the wall, the shadow on the wall had a story about it, and it was attractive, and you identified with it because you'd identified it with it your entire life. So now all of a sudden you have to abandon that which you came to identify with because that's all you've ever known. That's what it's about.
Mhm. Um, and that's where too, I think, to kind of build on that idea. It's like this can't be this. It must be this because it's everything. All I've ever known
Right,
is that it's this.
right,
Muslims can't be normal people. They must be terrorists because that's all I've ever been told. Is
right,
that if you are a Muslim, you believe in Sharia law, and all Muslims believe in Sharia law. When I say, well, no, my friend who has left the cave, that is simply not the case. In
right.
fact, very, very few people who practice Islam embrace Sharia law.
It's called Sharia for a reason.
Right. And well, that can't be.
Right,
Why? Because I am uncomfortable, because I
right,
would have had to be wrong. And the very one of my musings, and why I believe these musings are so very important, is because I think to understand how we can responsibly govern ourselves and have any kind of a successful future in any capacity is to understand human nature, which is what Plato and Socrates and Aristotle spent so much time trying to understand, is
right,
what is the human mind, what is man, what is human, and why are we the way we are.
right.
It
So,
is discomfort that is the ultimate driver of everything. And I know you have a thought, so go, John.
so this is really important. What you've just said is really, really important, because one of the things that has been going on in society for the past decade or so, let's say, is the notion that if something in an educational text makes anybody in the classroom uncomfortable,
Mm,
as said, discomfort is what is required to have education. It's what's required to expand your mind and your understanding. So the adoption of this notion that no text in an educational institution should make anyone uncomfortable is exactly going contrary to the purpose of education.
yeah,
And that's why so many educators are just up in arms against this particular movement, and why people on the old left, that would be my generation and older, take a look at woke language police and say, you woke folks might identify with left, but you're not left. You're fascist, because you are trying to destroy history because documents written in the past were written in the past. Well, that's obvious. They were written in the past. Wake up. In fact, wake up. Past texts were written at a time when language was in a certain state and people had certain beliefs, and we want to know what they thought. We don't want to get rid of it because we don't like it today. That doesn't make any sense.
right.
And it's
Do we?
complete against education and enlightenment. You only gain knowledge through trying to understand the past and see how it might be relevant today and the changes that occurred over time and so on and so forth. So it's a really important topic because there is this mythology that woke is of the left and anti woke is of the right. But the problem is that when you have people who believe that they are social justice warriors and they are taking on methodologies that are essentially akin to fascism, like restricting books, restricting education, restricting what can be taught in a school. It doesn't matter whether that comes from so-called right or so-called woke. It's the same effect, which is to close down the opening of the mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, when you said discomfort, you obviously got me on a very hot spot.
Well, it's true, but like it is a hot spot. It's everything, you know. I've been on a I watched several fantastic documentaries by Al Jazeera recently. Both come out a month ago
Mm,
about the state of the climate and what these liars, what the people behind their wall of money have
right.
done,
Right.
have done irreversibly, un, unquestionably will happen because of what they put up on the wall versus
Preci-
what was happening outside of the cave.
precisely.
You know, you live in Miami, move, sell your house.
Right.
Okay. Thank the oligarchs that you can't live there anymore.
Right.
At least the oligarchs are still pumping the value of your property so they can make more money.
Right. They'll sell you an air conditioner.
Right. So, but if you want, I'm not going to sour the discussion with that. If you want to understand, go read my essay I put out in the last couple days. And
Which one is that? Name it.
it is called the oh my god, now that I'm on the spot, I can't remember my own name, my own essay. Um, it's called The Great Suppression, the truth they spent billions to bury, the black swans of climate change. Um,
Good time.
and so I go into all of that and go read it. I think it's a must read. But today we're in a cave, and I'm gonna keep you there. But we will leave together at the end of this show.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
It's
Uh,
important to move on to the leaving the cave section, because
yes,
that is where people are right now. They're wanting to leave the cave.
yes,
En masse,
yes.
people are are researching the the financial connections between all of these oligarchs and these nation states and the military industrial complex. People are starting to really wake up to this in a big way, I think. So
Yeah.
let's go into that
I'm going
section.
to put on my Glaucon hat.
Okay. Okay, so I am going to read the pretentious text again. So he continues, and if I said, I'll just change it a little bit. And if I said someone dragged him, a person who's only ever known the cave and who is now starting to be forced to see reality and describe pieces of wood. So if someone dragged him by force up the steep, rugged, and upward path and didn't let go until he was dragged out into the light of the sun, would he not be in pain and angry at being dragged like that? When he came into the light, his eyes would be dazzled and he wouldn't be able to see any of the things now called realities.
Not right away, at least.
I suppose he'd have to grow accustomed to the light if he were going to see the things in the world above. At first, he'd see the shadows most easily. Next, the reflections of people and other things in the water, and then the things themselves. From there, he would gaze upon the light of the moon, the stars, and the sky by night, more easily than looking at the sunlight and the sun.
Certainly.
Last of all, I expect he'd be able to see the sun, not mere reflections of it in the water or in some other medium, but he would be able to look at the sun itself in its own place and to contemplate what sort of thing it is.
Necessarily.
Of course, this is before they knew looking at the sun was bad for your eyes. But anyway.
He went blind. Why? Why, Socrates?
Right. Let's keep this parable going.
Yeah, sorry.
After this, he'd now proceed to conclude about the sun that it is that which gives the seasons and the years, and that which governs all things in the visible world, and is, in a certain way, the cause of all things that he and his companions saw
It is
inside the
clear
cave.
he would see things in this order.
So, what next? When he remembered his former life in the cave, the wisdom there, and his fellow prisoners, don't you think he would pity them and consider the change that happened to him as a happy one?
Certainly he would.
And if there were then any honors or prizes those in the cave gave to one another for the person who was sharpest at seeing the shadows passing on the wall, and to the person who best remembered which shadows usually came before the others, which came after, and which at the same time, and as a result was most able to predict what was going to happen next, do you think that he would envy and esteem the people who were honored and had power inside the cave? Or would he say with Homer, better to work the soil, a slave of a poor master, rather than believe what they believe and live as they live?
Yes, I think he would rather suffer anything than believe or live as they do.
So that's just a great section
So
of the,
good. So good.
it really it brings out the 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 shallowness of the 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 group of people who have built up this story around the shadows and who celebrate one another and even maybe develop riches through whatever means, whatever, but they think very highly of themselves and they believe the stories to be rich even though they are false. And at the end he says, I would rather be a farmer than live as they live,
Right.
working the land which I have now discovered exists instead of this paltry existence chained inside a cave. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just really I like that section a lot.
And I really appreciate the length at which he goes into talking about the merit of an award received within the cave, right? Something that would make someone very proud. For example, in a more modern context, maybe, for example, someone receives the praise okay, from Marjorie Taylor Greene for their great work in the promotion of the American making America first in their community. And suddenly they exit the cave and they leave MAGA and they look back on the other people who received that award. And instead of saying, well, that was something that at the time I was filled with pride, now I pity them for thinking that they themselves have achieved some pinnacle of greatness when ultimately they have muddied their own, um, the merits of themselves and muddied their own reputation by endorsing such things.
Right, right. And then of course you take that up to the top, and obviously receiving a gold airplane from Qatar is just a obviously you must be worshipped by these people, right? Same story. The people running it are all these people um, who have virtually no knowledge. They're not very knowledgeable people, the leaders of the USA, and they're basically in a cave, trying to. They are themselves actually, it seems to me, people who are chained and are looking at shadows on the wall, and the shadows on the wall are their uh, their inherited racist assumptions, um, their inherited misogyny. Of course, I'm speaking mainly of Trump, but anybody who colludes with him is in the same camp. They're all in the same cave, and the shadows that they're looking at are just the result of all of this building up of a strange fictional world that they believe in, that they want the rest of us to believe in.
Yeah,
So
I think
we don't want to be there, that's for sure.
you hit such a strong point here in that it is a fictional world. It is fictional. It does not exist. The world that they are describing, that they have built for their willing participants within this cave, behind a wall of red, white, and blue that they have shaped in their own image, that they have misled people to believe that this represents. Um, that is a fiction. That is not real.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
that, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and so it being not real does not change for these people if they themselves um, are prideful and because of that, because of this comfort that is going to be a recurring theme throughout all of these things. I want to say, you cannot drag MAGA out of the cave. It's very difficult. I'm
Hmm.
not going to say it's entirely impossible, but they will, if they feel uncomfortable, get up, shield their eyes from the sun, and go back into that cave and put back on their medals and chain their own neck to look at the wall because it is uncomfortable. And their reflection to the pain of being dragged up that bumpy slope and being forced to see things they don't want, they want to be the slave of a poor master rather than till their own land as a farmer.
Yeah. Well, that said, there are people coming out of MAGA and describing how they came out. Thank
Yes.
goodness those people are speaking up. That's a great thing. But yeah, it's a very timely thing we talk about this today.
Yeah. Yep. And to your point, you're right. Not everyone can. Not everyone is subject to that choice to go back into the cave. And it's speaking of we return to the cave, and perhaps why these people are leaving is the very thing we are going to discuss next. Is
Yeah.
what that cave looks like after you leave.
Right.
And I would say I saw a comment that says we may be beyond the cave as a metaphor for enlightenment. I disagree, respectfully. I think there is no better metaphor for enlightenment. A cave itself is a closed space. It's underground. Everything outside of the cave is what you can't see outside of the cave. Now, if I wanted to be really nitpicky and annoying, which I can on occasion, you could say that they're discovering that because of water and limestone, these caves could go on forever and you never know where they go. And cool, you know what? That's true. And I think spelunking is really cool. And if you never need to just check out for the day, watch videos of people spelunking around in caves. It's very entertaining. Um,
This is a metaphor, however.
but however, this is a metaphor. And it's a great metaphor, and I stand by it. But I also accept that this world is very complex and strange, and there's so many avenues of deception, and perhaps even leaving the cave now, it's hard to avoid um, the strategies used within. And I will acknowledge that. But for the sake of the discussion, and when we finish, maybe we can take a few minutes to look at the nuances. But for the sake of the discussion, I'm going to put on my Plato hat, and we will talk about what it's like when a prisoner who has been freed goes back down into the cave and what they might experience.
Right.
So
Please.
consider the following as well, I said. If this person coming back down were to sit in the same seat again, having come suddenly out of the sun, wouldn't his eyes be filled with darkness?
To be sure.
If he were once again forced to compete with those who were always prisoners, forming judgments about the shadows while his vision remained weak before his eyes had fully recovered, given that the time needed to get used to the darkness would not be very short, wouldn't he appear ridiculous? Wouldn't people say that he ascended and returned with ruined eyes, and that it's not worth even trying to go up out of the cave? And if they somehow managed to catch the man who attempted to free and guide others upward, wouldn't they kill him?
No question.
Wow. Wow.
You
What
see,
an
folks,
assertion there.
ancient knowledge is pretty cool. Yeah, that's priceless. That's just
Yeah.
priceless.
Wouldn't they kill him? Absolutely. No question. Like,
No,
oh my God. You
just,
know?
we've seen this play out in the past 8 or 10 months,
Mhm.
over and over again with university administrations getting
Mm,
rid of people who are too educated, too critical, too thought provoking, and so on. We've had some of your American professors defect to Canada because they feel that they can't educate in their university that they used to teach at.
yeah.
So it's so pertinent right now that this situation is used to discredit the educated class because they first of all want to associate them with the privileged elite, when
Yes.
in fact the privileged elite are just moneyed people, and that the educated elite are the people who are the most critical of the oligarchs. So it's very convenient for the oligarchs and their puppets to try to pretend that educational institutions are elite, and those are all the elite that needs to be fought against because the elite causes the problems. It's another shadow game. It's a shadow game because it's the oligarchs, stupid.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the professors at universities.
No.
You
Because
know,
the professors have read the allegory of the cave. And you
among a
know,
million other things.
these
Yeah.
people, you have two different kinds of people, I think, in the world. If you're talking about those who are sinister, who are evil, you have the people who have read the allegory of the cave, and they see within the story that they can build a wall themselves, that they can puppet whatever they would like, and they can influence people to do so. And then you have the people who read the allegory of the cave and say, well, I certainly see that I can be manipulated in this way, and I will do everything I can to avoid it. But then
Right.
you have the people who are ignorant to the entire story, and they exist outside of these two groups. And oftentimes they will discover that something of this nature can be done and do it anyway, but they often make stupid mistakes because they don't fully understand what they're trying to do. Right now, I think we see two groups of people. I think you have both of those types of people doing what we're seeing. You have people who simply have money and power and are just trying to figure out how to use it. And then you have people like Peter Thiel, who have certainly read the parable of the cave and understand exactly what they need to do to remain obscured behind the wall
Right.
and use their puppets. And those puppets are not mainstream media. They are people who are also puppeting the mainstream media. Peter Thiel is like one of those dudes in, when you have three guys who stack up in a trench coat, and he's the guy at the bottom, right? And he's tugging on the other dude's foot, telling that guy to tug on the other guy's foot, and then he'll move the puppet one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense, they do, and I guess the thing I think that is most pertinent about this passage, and to kind of echo what you were saying earlier is this attacking and violence that comes from leaving and coming back in and trying to tell the people within the cave themselves, well, your accomplishments are meaningless. You have not achieved anything. You've been duped. And I can't even see what you've seen now because I have seen the sun.
Right.
And that again circles back to our notion of comfort and
Right.
how making them uncomfortable leads to certain reactions.
Well, and let's just take a real world example
Yeah,
uh,
please.
where, for example, when I speak out against woke fascism, people who can't think in a very subtle way will say, "Oh, you're just anti-woke. You must be a right winger." I said, "No, no, no. I'm thinking critically about the topic.
Hmm.
I can differentiate between social justice warriors who are trying to end starvation in the world and woke justice warriors who are canceling a university professor who's usually of left wing um, because they wrote a book, several years ago where they used a wrong word, and therefore they must be fired from their job. And so, this problem of accepting any kind of fascist infiltration in the society is that universities themselves have accepted a number of these woke directives and have changed their universities so that they are now restricting the exploration of knowledge because woke activists have insisted that if they don't, for example, uh, not accept any speeches from conservative speakers because conservatives are all bad. Conservative equals bad. Therefore, I'm going to hold a placard and I'm going to shout in any guest speaker who is a conservative. Well,
Hmm.
that's not an educational institution anymore because university is supposed to be a place where all ideas are up for discussion. And it's difficult and it's uncomfortable, and you may actually change the way you think, which is
Right.
what a university is all about. And we're
Yeah.
talking about Socrates today, which is the kind of founding father of this whole concept of questioning.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think it's really important for anybody watching to understand that anything that we talk about exists in a very, very broad context, and that you can't label if you're dealing with this kind of educational question. You can't just conveniently label things and then put them to bed. You have to keep going. You have to keep going for the rest of your life, basically. So what it all means, right?
Yeah. And I think this is where he ties it all together. And, as we come up on the top of the hour, we're going to bait you and we're going to tell you that there is, in fact, one more section, a very important section after this, called Discovering the Truth. And I say, go and read it. Click on the link that will be provided in the show notes, and let's do that, because I want to challenge you to engage with this material, and I think we've got you on the hook pretty good right now. So
Hope.
I'm gonna put on my Glaucon hat, and John's gonna put on his Plato hat, and we're gonna figure out what it all means.
Okay, so we're going to talk about discovering the truth section. It is necessary for us to think the following about these things. Education is not what some people profess it to be. I suppose they claim that they put knowledge into the soul that isn't already in it, like putting sight into blind eyes. That's what they claim.
Oh no!
That's
Sorry,
your line.
I missed it.
You missed your line, buddy.
I was so wrapped up in what you were saying.
So, whereas our present argument shows that this power and instrument of learning is in the soul of each person already, and just as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to light without turning the whole body, so too the whole soul must be turned from becoming to being, until the soul is able to look up and contemplate the brightest aspect of being, which we claim is the good. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
That's your cue. So there would be a skill focused on this turning of the soul. This skill would aim to facilitate the easiest and most efficacious, that means efficient, way to accomplish this conversion. It's not a skill concerned with producing the sight in someone. Instead, it assumes that sight already exists, but is not properly oriented, nor looking at what it should be, and works to bring about the proper orientation.
That's likely.
Then the other excellences of the soul, what a great concept. The
Mhm.
other excellences of the soul, as they are called, are probably nearer in being to those of the body, for in reality they are not present at first, but later are produced through habits and training. The excellence of understanding, however, is more than anything something divine. Its power is never destroyed, but by being turned become then but by being turned, oh, I don't know how this works, but by being turned becomes either useful and beneficial or useless and harmful. Yeah, okay, that makes
There you
sense.
go. That's a hard one.
Have you ever noticed the case of people who, on the one hand, are said to be wicked, but on the other hand, are said to be wise? The sharp sight of their petty souls keenly observes the things towards which they are turned, since they don't have poor vision. But compelled to serve vice, the sharper their vision, the more evil they accomplish.
Quite so.
But the power of understanding is such that, but the power of understanding is of such a nature that if it were from childhood hammered straight, and if its kinship with becoming were cut off, feasts and such pleasures and luxuries that have become attached around the soul, turning its vision downward like lead weights. If having been freed, it were turned around to what is true, then this same understanding that belongs to human beings would begin to see what is true most sharply, just as it currently discerns the things toward which it is turned. That's all very complicated language.
Very likely. It is. It is very and this in particular is calling back upon a lot of the things discussed in the Republic as a whole.
Uh,
Because it is, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, a long and kind of tedious read in some places, because the way, like, where John got tripped up there, the translation itself um can come across in very strange, language. But the excellences of the soul, like you pause to iterate there, it's this notion of justice, that predicates the entire story. Good governance, and what it is to be a successful society, a just society. And what you constantly find throughout is that it is nearly impossible to hammer down what actually is just, what actually is good.
Right.
Um, and and that's kind of the nature, I think, of the republic, and when he does end up discussing his government, his perfect society, you're like, dude, this is eugenics.
Right.
And so you wonder, uh how, you get this kind of, I go back, there's this idea of logos, which is very Plato, very Socrates, looking at through a strictly logos lens. And I always kind of say a successful government, what he lacks is a logos with the ethos. You need the ethical in balance with the logic to
Right.
have some form of successful governance. Because what I think the law often lacks is it's based so rootly in the logos of it, the logic of it.
Right.
And a law that is rigid and standard
Right.
protects the wealthy and the powerful.
Right.
Whereas if you introduce ethos as the ethic of it, there you go. You then are able to balance. Well, perhaps it is logical that someone who commits this crime must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. However, if you can pay people to doubt, if you can disappear
Right.
the jury,
Yeah.
perhaps we need
Yeah.
another way
Yeah.
of doing these things. So
So I think it's important, because that last passage was somewhat difficult to follow and even
yeah,
somewhat difficult to read. I think it's important, if I might read the summary from
please.
the website, but just for people who may not go to the website, to really understanding the fundamental difference in terms of education. And this is something that I talk about all the time with my own students. And that is that education is not about stuffing information into your head, but awakening your capacity to learn. And so I want to read Education as Turning the Soul to the Good, which is the main idea section on the website that you can go visit. Can we end with that?
Yes, please.
Okay. As Socrates stated at the beginning, the point of his cave story is to show the effect that education, in the broadest sense, has on human nature. And by broadest sense, he means not just going to school, but thinking. As he finishes explaining the meaning of his story, he challenges a common conception of what education and learning are. At his time, just like today, many people thought of education as putting information into someone's mind.
Mhm,
On this model, the teacher presents some new knowledge and the pupil receives that knowledge into his or her soul. Now, even talking about the soul in this context is already a step up from what a lot of people do, I would say.
mhm,
So Socrates, however, rejects this view of education, that it's putting it into you. And he says that education isn't about one person putting information into someone else's mind. Instead, education consists in turning the soul so that it can see new things and have new insights that it hasn't had before. Notice the emphasis on the word soul rather than mind,
mhm,
because the mind by itself without a soul can be dysfunctional, let's say, as we see in the public realm a lot these days.
mhm,
These new insights, as the cave allegory suggests, often enable one to recontextualize and to achieve a more complete interpretation of all of one's previous experience. The job of the teacher isn't to put new knowledge into the student's mind. Rather, it is to lead the student to achieve new insights on his or her own. Likewise, the job of student isn't to passively receive what the teacher says, but instead to actively seek to understand what the teacher is trying to communicate. education is the reorientation of one's whole life towards seeking the truth.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
That's that's where
brilliant.
it's brilliant. And when I first read it as a teenager, uh, I just thought, yeah, okay, this is what it's really all about. And
Hmm.
that actually conditioned my entire approach to my entire life. Actually,
Yes.
that
It's
this parable,
foundational.
it's foundational, and certainly I have lived by this notion about what knowledge and intelligence is all about, for my entire existence. So it's really worth exploring the parable of the cave and
Mhm.
other works of Plato and Aristotle and so on. It's ancient knowledge, but it's so valuable still today.
I agree. It's the foundation of everything. If you think the people who, the philosophers, if you think Thomas Jefferson, or George Washington, to name a few really controversial historical figures that are responsible for some good things and a lot of bad things. But if you think these great thinkers, if you think, uh, Adam Adam Smith,
Mm.
the guy who wrote Wealth of Nations. If you think that, um, you know, uh, Galileo, and these people did not read the allegory of the cave, the parable of the cave, you are wrong. It is because they read this foundational idea, because they looked at knowledge a certain way, that they were able to achieve what they did to further the collective human knowledge.
Well, I would say that the development of the creative spirit itself
Mm-hmm.
uh, is enabled by this understanding of that your life is towards
Mm-hmm.
seeking truth. Yes, seeking the truth, but seeking, the whole concept of seeking is a creative concept itself, and that's something that is imperiled by an overly consumerist society where that notion of seeking is restricted to seeking a good deal, at the
Yeah.
store.
Well, if it's delivered to you, you don't need to seek it.
Right, exactly.
It is um, the exact opposite of what knowledge is.
Yeah.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. I know I did. I'm sure John did.
Love it.
And so, with that said, I'm going to bring us to a close today. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I want to remind you that I'm going to be sharing the link to this source that we use from the University of Notre Dame, uh, to use, and it has all of these great thought experiments within it. We didn't go over these things, but take this resource and go have this discussion with someone, even if they've read it a long time ago. Have this discussion and maybe share it with somebody who you think, maybe, your MAGA uncle. Maybe you can present it as, hey, I read this awesome thing, like, I want to talk about it with someone. Are you interested? And plant the seed. This could be a tool, in leading people out of the cave, instead of dragging them, simply unlocking the chains around their neck and saying, perhaps you could turn around and look at the wall of money behind you, and Mark Zuckerberg picking his nose and waving around, the Meta flag, or Stephen Miller chewing cardboard behind the wall. These people, this could be an opportunity. If you want to see more dialogue, if you want to support our work, um, become free subscribers, and also paid subscribers. I have to be candid with everybody. Um, Things are expensive. We tried to pay our bills, and it's a little tighter than we would like. So I have savings. I will use them as long as I can to do this. But those paid subscriptions, they help me, they help John continue to do this. And so, we need your support in doing all of these things. Also, listen to John's music. It's awesome. I listen to John's music all the time. He just put out a new piece, on freedom, that I was listening to before, which is super cool. So I will link it in the show notes, but go listen to it.
Thank you, Shane.
Super cool. And, John, I'm going to throw this at you. Leave them with one burning thought question for them to mull over as we end the show.
Once you have read the parable of the cave, you can't unlearn it.
That's right. I like it. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been The Dialogue. We'll be back next week, and we hope to see you join us again, same time, every week. The discussion must go on. So make sure you take what we talked about today, take it with you to church, your community center, to the bus stop, to that guy who's standing next to you at the traffic light at the crosswalk, and continue the discussion. So thank you very much. Burn bright, resist, and we will talk to you all later.
See you next week.